So welcome everybody to our latest the bi-monthly series of talks, Building the Future, which is sponsored by the Victoria Baha'i community. And we're very pleased tonight to have Adrienne Carter return. Some of you may have been here back in November when she spoke on mental health and our search for meaning. And she has very kindly agreed to come back and speak some more on a related and very important topic. So Adrienne's talk is about how we can work through traumatic events and come out whole and healthy and ready to serve humanity. How do we climb out of those dark nights of the soul and make meaning out of our life experiences? So using her own life story as an example, Adrienne is going to talk about how we can heal ourselves and how spirituality can assist us on this healing journey. And the principle is mirrored in the healing of the world from its trauma. So Adrienne is a psychotherapist and longtime Baha'i who's worked in the field of mental health for 30 years. She has a master's degree in social work from McGill. She's worked in many places throughout Canada and overseas with traumatized populations because of wars and natural disasters. Recently, Adrienne has worked in Jordan with the Center for Victims of Torture as a psychotherapist and a trainer. She's had the opportunity to work in many parts of the world with traumatized people of all races, ethnic, and religious groups. And presently, she's part of a group that's setting up a mental health project in Gaza and also here in Victoria to provide trauma counseling for the refugee and immigrant population who've come to Victoria for a new life. And this oppressed group of people is, of course, in our collective thoughts. So before we begin the talk, we will begin with a Baha'i prayer for humanity.
O thou kind Lord, thou hast created all humanity from the same stock. Thou hast decreed that all shall belong to the same household. In thy holy presence, they are all thy servants, and all mankind are sheltered beneath thy tabernacle. All have gathered together around thy table of bounty, and all are illumined through the light of thy providence. O God, thou art kind to all. Thou hast provided for all, thou dost shelter all, conferrest life upon all. Thou hast endowed each and all with talents and faculties, and all are submerged in the ocean of thy mercy. O thou kind Lord, unite all. Let the religions agree and make the nations one, so that they may set each other as one family and the whole earth as one home. May they all live together in perfect harmony. O God, raise aloft the banner of the oneness of mankind. O God, establish the most great peace. Cement, though, O God, the hearts together. O thou kind Father God, gladden our hearts through the fragrance of thy love. Brighten our eyes through the light of thy guidance. Delight our ears with the melody of thy word, and shelter us all in the stronghold of thy providence. Thou art the mighty and powerful. Thou art the forgiver, and thou art the one who overlooketh the shortcomings of all mankind. Abdul Baha.
Thank you. First of all, I would like very much to welcome all of you here. Many of the faces are familiar, some are not so. So whether friends or people who have come to hear the talk, you are most welcome. The reason for the prayer was that our world needs healing a great deal. I am sure that we are all aware of what is happening around us, some of the terrorist attacks in Brussels and in France, and even the countries that have not been so influenced by the terrorist attacks. There are fear all over. So our world could really need assistance from us, and each of us can give a little bit in order to help heal this very large world that is really struggling with violence. Violence and many other things. Having just come back from Jordan, I was very close to that violence. Daily, we saw hundreds and hundreds of refugees pouring into that small country of Jordan, totally traumatized. And then eventually Jordan entered the war also against ISIS. So we were surrounded everywhere with the concept of violence. But what is very important to realize that before we can really think about healing the world, how do we heal ourselves? And that is what this talk is about. It is very important to look at what traumas we have suffered, because in this life, it's very hard to imagine that you can come through life without, in some ways, suffering some form of trauma. Many of us had trauma in our childhood due to wars and natural disasters or other traumatic events. Many of you here has had to leave their countries and resettle in another country. Some have suffered trauma due to abuse, due to rape, early abuse during childhood. So we all struggle with certain areas of life. And how do we heal ourselves? That is the topic of today. And I'm going to use some of my own experiences because it's very difficult to know how to transform ourselves, how to heal ourselves. We need stories, we need guides, and often these guides are not available. So people are stuck in the trauma and find it very difficult to overcome it. So what I would like to share today is how I personally managed to overcome a lot of the early trauma. Now, that's not the only way to do it. It was my way. We all have to find our own ways. During the last talk in spirituality and mental health, we talked a little bit about how the state of our mental health affects our mind, our body, and our spirit. Often, when we are struck with various ailments, it is very much connected with how our mind and spirit works. Oftentimes, having worked with new refugee clients, what became very evident is the intense spiritual alienation that they were feeling. Many of them were spiritually very strong before the war, but during the war, this alienation became stronger and stronger, and they suffered from that. Many became suicidal, they didn't want to go on living. So the importance of our mind, spirit, and body working together will be mentioned during this presentation. It is very interesting to see that in the Gnostic gospel, this was attributed to Jesus. If you bring forth what is inside of you, what you bring forth will save you. If you don't bring forth what is inside of you, what you don't bring forth will destroy you. I was a bit surprised at how early this statement has been found, because if we suffer from some trauma, and we repress the trauma, it stays inside our bodies, and it literally eats away at our bodies. If we can bring it forth, share the story, find resolution, find integration, that is the way to healing. And it is really the only way of healing. Perhaps most of us have met with people who have suffered huge traumas way back in the Second World War or a little bit more recently, and they can't talk about it. It is stuck within themselves. And therefore, they take that to their deaths often. Healing does not happen. The statement that time heals doesn't always ring true. Time doesn't heal, but we can heal ourselves. There are many, many ways of achieving this healing. So what you see here is the top of an iceberg. That is the face we present to the world. That is how people know us. However, there is a very large part of this iceberg that is underneath us, in the darkness. And this is where we keep a lot of our resources, a lot of our potential. But unless we learn how to bring this large part forward, it's not going to show. It's stuck in the darkness, and we're not using the gifts that we have been given. So in order to do this work of transformation, it's not an easy job to do. We need guidance, and we need maps and stories from people who have traveled on these roads. Psychiatry, if you go to a psychiatrist and say you're really feeling down, they will give you a clinical diagnosis, and usually they will give you medication to treat you. Unfortunately, oftentimes the medication temporarily treats the symptoms, but unless you can go to the roots of those feelings, these symptoms are likely to come back. And psychology is often geared towards changing the behavior and adapting. So neither of these fields are willing or wanting to really go deeper to search the core of the issues and assist you in resolving them, because that is really hard work and it takes time. And those of us who are therapists know that it is not easy to walk with that person who is suffering and share that suffering, because we need to walk parallel on that road in order for the person you're working with to be able to achieve healing. Because what is most important in achieving healing is the connection that you have with another person. Sometimes just people knowing that you really care and you want to hear their stories, no matter how difficult those stories are, is a big part of the healing. What I have found when I have listened to thousands of stories of torture and humiliation and rape and everything else, most people have a real difficulty hearing these stories because it goes into them and it causes a lot of pain. So how can we learn to hear the stories and accompany that person on their journey and not be filled with the same kind of pain? Because then you get secondary trauma if a lot of this pain enters into you. So it's very lonely and very frightening oftentimes to face ourselves. And if we can assist ourselves, if we can heal ourselves, that's the way towards us working to healing the world. Early trauma can permanently disturb people's capacity to deal with challenges. This is why it's so important to look at early trauma, especially childhood trauma, and see how we can transform it. Actually, with children, it doesn't take very long time to transform trauma. Sometimes 4 to 6 sessions can do an amazing job, and this child can be freed from a lot of the early trauma. If we don't do this healing, what happens is the trauma keeps being repeated. So you become either a victim or a victimizer. For example, children who have been physically or sexually abused in early childhood often get themselves subconsciously into relationships where the abuse continues, or they may become the victimizer and conflict abuse on others. And you can see that in countries too. Countries who haven't worked through their trauma may repeat it and become either victim or becomes victimizer. So in healing the world, it is so important to try and resolve individual traumas so that the same thing isn't going to be repeated again and again. So my job is to listen to stories, to help people in the reconstruction of their lives. And I work with dreams, with physical sensations, and body memories, because all of these can help the story to come to the surface. And initially, when I started being a therapist many, many years ago, I only listened with my conscious mind. I was a very normal clinical therapist, but I could not enter with my clients totally on their journey. So therefore, the healing was partial and not complete. So I came to the realization that unless I do my work, it is very difficult to lead any of my clients towards their healing. And I have had the opportunity to work with a couple of people who were diagnosed with dissociative identity disorder. And I don't know whether this is a familiar term. I know to some of you it's a very familiar term, but it was previously called multiple personality disorder. And it always happens when the child is severely abused during the first several years of life. So as a defense mechanism, they split themselves off and create many personalities. So some of the clients that I had the opportunity to work with had maybe 50 to 100 personalities. And these personalities functioned in different aspects of life. So one was able to go to school, and now these were adult clients who talked about their early abuse. But one was able to go to school and did very well in school, while the child who was at home was the abused one. She took all the pain, all the suffering. Then they had other personalities like guards who tried to prevent the abuse. So part of the work was to identify all these personalities, help them to get to know each other, to share the memory of what has happened to them, and then try and achieve integration and healing. So with a couple of these people, the work was really long and arduous. In one case, it took about 5 years to work through everything. But the gift that they have given me is the realization that unless I do my work and complete it, I wasn't going to be able to help them. Now, this came in a very vivid dream to me many years ago. it was what I call a guidance dream. There was a large group of people who have gathered, and I was the one leading them out of, they were refugees, I believe, trying to lead them out to safety. We walked all through the nights. The road was rough and difficult. And then we reached miles of desert areas. Now, the desert has a very poignant symbolism in archetypal literature. The desert is where the bones are, the desert that holds so much of the stories, of the memories. And beyond the desert, I could see the green, verdant land of Canaan. However, the travelers were barefoot, they were weary, and we could not get through the desert. They scattered each to find their own destination, and I was very disappointed with my inability to lead them through. So my task for the next several years was to find my way through the desert and to reach the green, verdant land of Canaan. Now, this is a dream, but this dream has assisted me to go forward. And we very often have guidance dreams if we listen to our dreams. In fact, it's a very good idea sometimes when you're trying to resolve something, write your dreams down. And most of the dreams at that time will be on a similar topic, and it will tell you which way you're supposed to be going. So I followed this dream. Now, I wanted to share with you a little bit of my early history, just for you to know what were some of the issues that I had to work through. Are you still following me? Is everybody okay? As good as it gets. Okay. I was born in Hungary in 1944. This is a picture of my maternal extended family in Budapest in the 1930s. It was a fantastic family. There were my great-grandparents were here, and they had 8 children. This was my grandmother. Unfortunately, for at least half of this family, I never had an opportunity to meet because they died during the war. This is my great-grandparents, who were really an incredible support to me up until they have passed away when I was maybe about 6 years old. And for my mother, this is my mother when she was young and quite beautiful with her mother. Life was very good. It was an upper middle class family, very loving family. Here is my mother and my father before they got married. Here I think they were already married. And this is Budapest, the land of my birth. And Budapest is a great city. I don't know whether some of you have had a chance to visit. I know Cor has visited twice in Budapest, but it was a beautiful city. So life was good. And this was my birth. That little baby is me, believe it or not. Now, when I was 8 days old and just out of the hospital, the German army marched into Budapest. I mean, Hitler has conquered many of the countries around, but this was the time they got to Budapest and to Hungary. And then everything changed. By October, I was probably about 7 months old, the Jewish population in Budapest was rounded up. The yellow star, everyone had to wear the yellow star, and people were haphazardly killed right on the streets and thrown into the Danube. My mother and I, my family was Jewish, and my mother and I have hidden in one of the Swedish safe houses and other places, and my father, who was only half Jewish, was taken to labor camps. So the family couldn't be together. My great-grandparents were taken into the Jewish ghetto, where most of the older Jews were taken, and the situation there was extremely traumatic. There was typhus, there was not enough food, so most of the people in the ghetto have actually died. So life for Jews became almost impossible. Then the transports to Auschwitz have started, and some of my family managed to escape, but the rest were taken there and were killed there. My mother herself had been taken to one of these death marches, but through some miracle and the influence of a friend, she managed to escape and come back. I was about 8 months old, and my grandmother was dying of cancer, and so she left me with her mother, and we didn't know what life was going to be like. This is the Auschwitz-Birkenau extermination camp in 1944. And this is where all the Hungarians were bought, where with one hand it was decided whether they would go to the gas chambers immediately or whether they would stay in the camp and continue to live. But I was kind of oblivious to a lot of this. I was an infant, with the exception that I was extremely ill with pyloric stenosis, and they had to do surgery during the war. Now, what was interesting that my mother didn't dare to state that the child in their care at the hospital was Jewish. So she left her coat with the yellow star outside of the hospital. A friend was holding it. And during the surgery, there was a bomb attack on the hospital, and so they had to finish really, really quickly. They patched up everything, and out you go. But I stayed alive. So a lot of these things, consciously, I have no memory. I know it from the stories. But what is interesting, later on I realized that my body had memory for these things. So in 1945, we are liberated by the Russian army. And I am 1 year old, and the population at this time is shell-shocked. The Russian army marched in, and they were liberators, but they often were not much better. They were really struggling also. There was no food in the country, so even getting food was a major miracle. And life went on under the Soviet rule. My parents managed to get some cloths and sew my clothes, so we managed. And also my parents opened a bookstore which provided a job for my great-grandfather who survived the Holocaust while they were in the Jewish ghetto. Now, we learned to worship Lenin, Stalin, and Rákosi. He was the Hungarian prime minister. Religion was non-existent. In fact, I have never known of my Jewish past. Nobody would talk about it. There was only communism, and that was our religion.